What's everybody? Welcome to Fam Sports New York Varsity Team Preview Show for Section 1B. And we're excited to start the football season up again, Mars. Want to welcome all our fans. My name is Frank Langella, joined by my co-host Marcelio Langella. Mars football is right around the corner.
Yeah, man. I think we're really just right there. We have a lot of teams playing in that week 0 game, as well as a lot of teams just participating in some scrimmages. So it's been a lot of fun, and the fact that we're just right around the corner is obviously just an exciting thing that we get to talk about football again.
Absolutely, and I just kind of want to give a welcome to the fans that came in. If you're not familiar with us, we cover Section 1 football, and this show in particular is kind of previewing the pro football programs in Section 1 Class B. And we do apologize for kind of being in the dark a little bit. Usually we kind of get this out a little bit earlier, but we ran into a couple personal and professional things that kind of delayed us. But we're here. We're ready to give these team previews. We're also looking to announce our Frank's Finest for the class. We're probably going to do a show about it before the week 0 games officially end by this weekend. But we'll definitely get it in before week 1. And if not, we'll announce them out to the public via our social medias. But we also want to kind of do a couple little plugins. If you like our content, please make sure to give a thumbs up and subscribe for more future content. And if you would like, you can also access our stuff via our website at famsportsny.com. We also have other content as well, such as Marsman Gaming, if you're interested in that kind of stuff. And if you are interested in donating to our cause, again, we constantly try to build up this program. We don't have paid subscriptions or anything like that. We're all donor-based. We would greatly appreciate it. You could definitely support us through our Patreon. But Mars, let's kick things into action, and by breaking down these different programs, and then we'll do a little bit of bold predictions at the end. And let's start with the defending champs in Pleasantville, coached by Coach Tony Becerra. And he's been doing it now since, 2004? Or has it been 18 years, which is just in high school football, it's difficult to be around that long at one program. So, obviously Coach has done a good job there, and they have a long history of, having one coach there for a long period of time. But Mars last year, 12-1. They beat Nanuet in the section title game. They lost to Maine Endwell in the state final last year. In the last 5 years, Mars, Pleasantville has been really strong, 36-14 over the last 5 years. I think that is number 1 in total wins, but number 2 in win percentage. And offensively, when you look at this group coming back, Mars, 7 of the 11 starters are returning. They do have to replace their quarterback in LaCapria, but on that offensive line, 4 out of 5 offensive linemen coming back. Now, they do lose a couple of veterans like Cotter, who was big for them last year. Their center, Gordon, which was also a key cog on that offensive line, but a lot of returning guys. And this is an offense that was 4th out of 10 teams in points scored. They had a very strong rush attack with Picard and Cotter. The question is, can they find consistency in their passing attack coming this year, and more running backs, right? It was a kind of a Picard show. Not like is something wrong with that, but can they find some other guys to kind of alleviate some of those carries? And defensively, Mars, 6 of 11 returning. They lose a guy like Miller, Mars. This was the number 1 defense in points allowed last year in B at 10.4 points a game. 6 games, they allowed less than 20 points, and 4 games, they allowed 7 or less points. They did a really good job of stopping the run and pressuring the quarterback. Now, I kind of mentioned it before, Mars, the biggest question mark to me, the passing attack, and specifically I'm looking at the quarterback spot, how they fill in that role. And those running backs outside Picard is going to be big for me. And obviously, if I'm looking at this team, Mars, I think they have a good chance at another section title run, if I'm going to be honest. Now, going to the players that are coming back, let's talk a little bit about them, and I'll let you kind of dive in. We have to start with Daniel Picard, right? Running back, wide receiver, defensive back. I think he led Section 1 in all-purpose yards last year. This guy, I call him a magician. I mean, this guy he's Houdini, magician, whatever you want to call him. He's a guy who just makes things happen, and sometimes it feels like when things break down and things are just not there, he finds daylight. He is a game wrecker for the other team because he can really take you the distance in any type of play as a returner, jet sweeps coming out of the backfield, just direct snaps as a wide receiver catching the ball. A very smooth and talented athlete, and is just very slippery. He's hard to square up and tackle. Um, One of the guys at that quarterback spot, and I believe he has the um, clear path for the starting role, is his brother, Aiden Picard. And coach kind of, I know here in at Pleasantville, the talk is that his arm is stronger and he's ready to take that mantle. This is a junior as well, just like his brother. And he's, I think he has some talent. He has some talent, and I do think he can be a big part to complement that rush attack. But man, this offense and this defense are going to kind of go with the guys up front to me, because they do have some skill guys, but the guys up front are going to make a lot of plays. And I'm talking about a guy like Joseph Ardsley on the defensive line and offensive line, two-way starter for them, one of their stronger players. I thought defensively he did a really good job using his hands. And a couple other guys, Tommy Cahill moved to center. He also has worked hard in the summer. He's a senior coming back. Joe Reish, he could be a two-way starter for this team, as well as in the offensive line and defensive tackle. I know I'm going to bury this young man's name, and I apologize, but Chad Saranganda, probably buried his name. He's a senior. He's a transfer from Stepinac, and I saw this kid. I mean, he is built. He's a strong kid, muscular kid. He's going to play on that O-line, and I believe the D-line. So another body there on the defensive line. You're kind of seeing these defensive linemen. Another guy, Ethan Taboy, is a returning player for them on the offense. Tabo, I apologize. Returning starter for them. And Cooper Kitsley is another kid on the defensive line, an explosive nose guard. I saw him at our showcase, Mars, and man, he has a really good first step. And he's getting better at using his hands than what I saw on tape. So you could see these bodies. They are there. And a couple other guys to mention, Eric Coleman as a wide receiver and defensive back. Shifty guy. Could start also at defensive back, but boy, he was a shifty wide receiver, a guy who can move around in space. But my player to watch for this team, Mars, I need a lot of guys, is Ryan Horrigan, a linebacker and running back. To me, I think he's one of the best linebackers in the class, and he is just smooth. He's a smooth athlete at the linebacker spot. He can run in space, and he is not afraid to attack that line of scrimmage and get his nose dirty in between the tackles, which is what I like. He's a versatile linebacker, and I expect to see him get some more burn on the offensive side. Michael Hadzitsky is another guy at the defensive back spot, and Emmett McDermott is a guy who got pulled up last year, free safety and wide receiver. Obviously very raw, but they're going to need him in the back, and especially if Picard is not going to play as much defense this year, they need guys in the secondary that are going to take that load. Mars, what are your thoughts? I know I gave you a lot on Pleasantville. What are your thoughts on Pleasantville?
Yeah, I mean, Pleasantville obviously had a historic run for the program, and they went all the way to the state title and had a really tough game and lost. But they were one of those teams that a lot of people didn't necessarily think would even get to the section title. So they kind of were the Cinderella team in a lot of ways. But now they're looking at they are looking at it, but everyone's saying that this team is going to be the one that makes it to the end, right? And I think when you look at Pleasantville, they are trying to be considered to be like that, that hype machine. They don't want to listen to the hype, but obviously it catches up to you when you got low HUD articles and everyone's saying, Pleasantville is going to walk into the section title. I think B is a very competitive league, but Pleasantville does have a lot of good things going for them, especially the fact that they have a lot of returning players. I mean, last year's team was extremely young. Now, granted, even that being the case, they do lose some key people. I mean, obviously Miller was a key player on the defensive side that was really important. Then you have Cotter, right? Cotter obviously played a lot on the offense, and obviously leadership on the line with Michael Gordon. I think he was a great center, and he was got a lot of accolades for that. But like you said, I think when you look at the guys who are here currently, you have a very good roster, right? I think you have a lot of depth. You have a lot of people who are going to contribute on this, and obviously Daniel Picard is a sensation. He's a top level guy, and everyone's going to key in on Daniel Picard. But it's really going to be about the quarterback, right? And Aiden Picard has obviously shown a lot in this offseason, and I think that he has a lot of talent behind him, and I think now he's going to start having this air of confidence because he did get plays in last year where he stepped in crucial moments when they needed them, and he did well. So I think the big thing is going to be the quarterback, but I think the most impressive is going to be the offensive line. Last year, they were extremely young, right? Mainly having almost just one senior on the line, and everyone else were just underclassmen that were either rotating in or really just staying at their spots. But a lot of those guys, 4 to 5 of them, are back, right? And that's going to be one of their strong suits. And obviously, Jojo Alasway, you got Tommy Cahill, Joe Reish, Chad Serengada. I think he's been transferred from obviously Stepanak, and he was a great guy that I think would be a big contributor to the team. Tabo is just another guy who's, you saw, if you can see the growth of a lot of these players, they're just growing tremendously. And, I think one of the most impressive on the defensive side is going to be Cooper Kisley. But I do agree with you. I think Brian Horgan is a guy that everyone's going to look at as being a defensive stud on this season. But obviously you have a lot of younger guys like Coleman and Hazinski, and Edmund McDermott. These are all guys that need to contribute. I think the biggest story of Pleasantville is how do the young guys contribute to help push this team going forward? Because I think a lot of the veteran presence is coming from the offensive line and D-line.
Yeah.
The rest of the backs and receivers and quarterback are all underclassmen. So the question is going to be, can they push this team going forward? And kind of, I guess almost like it's kind of interesting. They're the one team that everyone's saying is automatically going to walk to the section title, but they're also still a young team in a lot of ways. So it's actually very interesting. So I think Pleasantville has a lot of good things going for them. The question is going to be, obviously, do they land? And obviously, I can't forget a captain like Owen Mooney, who's obviously going to be another contributor because he played as a starting defensive Panther or an outside linebacker, last year. And I think now he's becoming more of a two-way player for them. So, guys like that are going to be, very interesting to see how do they step up, right? If they're going to show up, I think Pleasantville will have a great season. If they don't, then it could be tough.
Yeah, and there's a giant target on their Pleasantville's back. And some of the names, obviously, I mentioned, I might make this clear, is it's not all the names that could contribute. There could be guys that become huge contributors that I did not say. So, again, this is a mix of lists that I've compiled along with what I've heard from coaches. So let's go to the next program, Mars, the runner-up, Nanuet. And they're coached by Phil Carbone. Last year, Mars, 8-2. Lost to Pleasantville in the section title game, but last year was their highest win total since 2016. So they had a very good year, and it was a very solid team. In the last 5 years, Nanuet is 24-19, 56 win percentage. So they've been pretty solid. Now, this is kind of a bit of a wild card. I didn't get to speak to Coach about the upcoming season, so I'm kind of guesstimating on their returning starters. But offensively, I think they have around 5 starters coming back. They do lose their quarterback in Frondy. On the offensive line, I do think they have 3 of their 5 coming back. But they lost some guys. A guy like Frondy, who was a dual threat quarterback for them, very athletic guy, really solid on the run. Guy like Bryzan Lenosi was a target. And this offense was number 5 out of 10, right? It wasn't a dominant offense, but they did get the job done. And you saw a lot of heavy sets, a lot of rush attacks, some spread, but it was a lot of run it down your throat type of offense. And I imagine they're going to continue that. The good news is, we'll mention it later on, they do bring back some key cogs on that offense. Defensively, I do think they lose even more. I think they're around 3 of the 11 starters coming. If I'm guessing, they lose a guy like Bennett, Kleber, Martini. Again, some big important pieces on the defensive side of the ball. A lot of these guys were two-way players. This defense, Mars, was pretty stout. They were number 3 out of the 10 schools in B last year at 12.1 points allowed in the regular season. They allowed 14 or less in 6 games last season. And they were very stout versus the run, and they were able to get some pressure on your quarterback and force you into mistakes. They weren't really a suffocating D, but they were very bend and don't break. And they made some big plays in big moments on that sealed games. My biggest question is the quarterback position. Frondy was very good for them as a kind of a dual threat guy, especially running the ball. And they have to replace some big players defensively, like I mentioned. Now, players to watch, obviously the number one guy that comes to mind is James Moran, running back and cornerback. He had over 1,000 all-purpose yards, 15 touchdowns, I think 15-plus touchdowns last year. And, boy, he's a pretty damn good defensive back as well. Really strong two-way player for Nanuet. He's one of the best players in the class. Another kid to keep an eye on, I thought had a very strong season, was Luke Flanagan, the senior. He's a defensive tackle, defensive end, tight end. This kid was a stout defender for them and also a blocking tight end on the offensive side of the ball. He's a guy he's got a long frame, uses his hands pretty well. A couple other names to keep in mind. I mentioned offensive line, defensive line. Andrew Hastings, the junior. This kid's 6'1", 225 pounds. He started on that offensive line. Uh, Another guy, defensive end, Daniel Niamolo, 6'1", long, lean. He got some. I saw reps at the defensive on the defensive side last year and on special teams. I think he had a block punt, which was huge in one of their games. But another solid frame kid. He's going to have to step in and probably play a bigger role on the defensive side of the ball. Um, Another guy on the offensive line, Connor Kiernan, a multi-sport athlete, wrestler, lax. He was on the offensive line, and when you play a Nanuet, you need some tough kids for that style of offense. You need some tough dudes who can move people. Connor Kiernan's a guy, and also Jacob Warbell. He started on that offensive line as well, and he is a strong, well-built kid. These are, again, not towering figures, but tough as nails type of guys. And I'll talk about some kicking. Jack O'Sullivan, he did a pretty solid job for them as a kicker. But Mars lost a lot of pieces, but they're also bringing back some key cogs as well for Nanuet.
Yeah, I mean, when Nanuet obviously is a really tough team, and you gotta give a lot of a lot of credit to Coach Carbone. Obviously having a really good season last year, all the way to the section title. And obviously they're gonna lose a lot of players. I mean, but when you look at the offensive line, they're returning 3 of the 5. And obviously one of the biggest people you're gonna have to replace is Frondy, right? But you do have a star when it comes to Moran. Right? Moran is one of those top level players. And based on what Nanuet's their mantra is that they're gonna play tough defense and they're gonna wear you out with outside runs on offense. They kind of just try to beat you to the outside and drain the clock. I don't see Nanuet being the high-powered, just quick scoring constantly on when it comes to like pass raise or anything. It's more like going to be about outside runs and just try to drain you out, right? Outrun you in a lot of cases. And they usually have big offensive line that will kind of push you around and then speed you back. So I think from their point of view, the biggest issue that they have is they need to just replace Frondy with another mobile quarterback that can really make some plays, because obviously when you're looking at this offense, I mean, they do have weapons, but it's really going to be Moran that is going to be the guy right now that we see as being a guy that everyone's going to key on. Very similar to like Pleasantville with Picard. Everyone's going to look at Moran and say, all right, that's the guy that we need to look out for. But granted, we don't know everyone and where the pieces are, so there could be some others that do emerge as another key players that can really shake things up. But I think for Nanuet, they do have, they lost some guys, but they do also return some key cogs.
Yeah. Let's go to the next program, ours, Hen Hud. And this program last year, 4-4, they lost to Byram Hills in the quarterfinals. In the last 5 years, Hen Hud has been a pretty steady team, 22-18. It's a 55% win percentage. They've had 4 or more wins in 7 straight years. So for me, the one thing is that Hen Hud, they never really like stink, right? They're always have a pretty stout program, and they're always going to give you some trouble. And that stat kind of tells me that. Now, I didn't get to speak to coach, so I don't, again, know the exact numbers of returning starters on the offensive, defensive side of the ball, but I do know they got to replace their quarterback. They lost McGuire. They did lose a guy like Whalen and Martinez that were big players for them on the offensive side of the ball. And offense was a bit inconsistent for them last year. They were number 7 out of 10 in points scored, but I thought that picked up towards the end of the year, and they were really running the ball very effectively by the end of the season. But what I liked the most was their defensive unit. Now, they do lose a guy like Pritchard, who was really strong for them. This was the number 4 defense out of 10 schools. And again, second half of the regular season, they were very strong. 3 out of their 4 games, they only allowed 7 points in the second half of the regular season. So again, really picked up in that second half. Big question to me, there's a lot of questions on the O-line and D-line, a lot of new starters stepping in. And I would imagine, again, I think Hen Hud has this pride in them that they could be competitive every year and rely on these newcomers. So we're interested to see if that continues. Now, a couple names to keep an eye on. One guy, offensive tackle and defensive lineman, Dougie Travis. He's a senior transfer from Stepinac Mars, 6'4", 280 pounds, large, big body kid. I was watching some tape on him, and he moved some bodies as a drive blocker and down blocker and held up pretty well in pass pro. And I do think him stepping into this league, I think he could be one of the best linemen in the class. No question about it. He is a large man, and he can anchor down an offensive line from what I saw. Now, he definitely work on his feet a little bit, but that's a big body right there who can move people, and that's going to be really important in this Hen Hud type of offense, especially at the offensive tackle spot. My player to watch though for this group is their quarterback, QB and defensive back, Demetrius Wells. He's a junior Mars, 6'1", 175 pounds, has some nice zip to him, shows some athleticism and some nice feet. He could be a big play guy for them off play action and some quarterback runs this season. And some other guys, Joseph Connolly is a lax player, defensive tackle and center, an outside linebacker and wide receiver, Ryan Clark, also a lax player. So you see some athleticism there. And another player, wide receiver and defensive back, Tyler Stolowski, 5'9" kid. And I actually like some of the work I saw during the summer. It seems to be him connecting with his quarterback. And he showed some nice athleticism and hands to him. So those are a couple of names that I watched. Mars, what are your thoughts on Hen Hud?
Yeah, Hen Hud's always been a really tough team. I mean, they've defensively, I think that they have a lot going for them. They're always a hard team to really just score a lot of points against. I mean, and you can see this by the stats that they have. They're extremely aggressive. They send a lot of stunts, and they're just in your face, right? And I think that's kind of the big thing I noticed right away with Hen Hud is that I feel like this mantra that they have is that they're always going to be a hard-nosed team. Now, granted, the downside in a historical standpoint is that they have had difficulties scoring a lot of points when these games get close. But I think the fact that their defense has always been tough is just going to keep them in games, right, with a lot of these high-powered offenses that you do see in B. And I think that obviously you have Dougie Travis is going to be a guy, obviously being a transfer, but I think is just a big body dude that's going to cause a lot of mayhem up front in the trenches. And I think when you're looking at Hen Hud, the key thing is, like I said before, trying to get more points on the board and just keep doing you on defense. I feel like defensively they've always been tough, and that was kind of their go-to thing. Right? Stay tough on defense. You gotta capitalize on turnovers because they cause turnovers. They get the ball, they just don't get to capitalize on that stuff. So I think that's going to be something that Hen Hud needs forward.
Let's go to the next program, Ardsley, and coached by Dan DeFalco. Last year, 6-3, they lost at Pleasantville in the semifinals. And the last 5 years, Mars, 33-10 for Ardsley. So they're second in total wins in B, Mars, but number one in win percentage in B. And you can tell Ardsley is a long, pristine program in B. They've had a tremendous success these last 5 years in this class. And they have 6 straight years with the winning record that they're trying to continue that streak going forward. But boy, Mars, they lost a lot of players from last year's team. 0 out of 11 starters on the offense have to replace their quarterback and Ballarge. 0 out of 5 offensive linemen coming back. You lose guys like Watson, Ballarge, Jones, Phelan, Costas. Those are a lot of names, and that's not even all of them. But this was the number 3 offense in points scored in the regular season. They had 28-plus points a game in 5 games. When I spoke to Coach, and this was true when you watch them, got penalty and turnovers killed them, Mars. I mean, this is a multiple offense, and at times they had some dominant drives going, but turnovers absolutely killed them, or penalties that just hurt their momentum in crucial moments last year, and especially in some big games, which really hurt them. And so that's definitely an emphasis to try to clean up. Defensively, 0 out of 11 starters coming back defensively as well. They lose Watson, Bulmer, Dash. This was the number 2 defense in B last year in points allowed. Only one game they allowed more than 20 points during the regular season. And defense is kind of a pride of this program. We talked about Hen Hud, that defense is usually strong. Ardsley usually has a very strong defense that is a pride to them, but at times last year, even though they were number 2, they were still very strong. They did give up some big plays and some big moments that Coach wants to rectify. But Mars, so many new names, so many young players are going to have to rely on. The good news is that Ardsley always has a pretty strong program on the JV too, so they kind of keep filtering in talent in their program. But some young guys to keep an eye on, some guys that are going to have to step in. Let's start with the quarterback spot. There is a large quarterback battle going. Avi Jolka, the senior, 5'10", 150 pounds, captain kid. Mike Rendy, the junior, also competing with him for that quarterback position. My player to watch for this team, though, is their linebacker and tight end, Aiden Wells. He's a captain, 6'1", 190 190 pounds, excuse me. And I think he can have a breakout year. I think, he moves pretty darn well. I think he has a toughness to him. He's going to have to be a two-way player for this team, and I do think he could be a breakout player for them. And a couple other guys to keep. Chewy Walks is a guy, wide receiver and strong safety. Anthony Chenard, also a wide receiver and defensive back. Coach talked about him. This guy could be a featured wide receiver in their offense. And they like to run a multiple offense like I talked about before. Times they'll bring in some heavy sets, run the ball. Sometimes they'll spread you out. So you need to have a mix of skill guys. And Coach talked about him and a couple running backs that are probably going to be splitting carries, like guys like Cole Fiore, Mikey Vega, that can help carry the load. But I'm also interested on that offensive line. Again, no guys returning. Who's going to step up for them? Christian King could be a guy who's worked pretty hard. Michael Samples, another guy that Coach mentioned. And finally, let's talk about an under-the-radar guy, Ben Silverman. Really good JV player, Mars. Is a guy who could step in. Coach is pretty excited for this young man to get out on the football field. What are your thoughts on Ardsley?
Yeah, I mean, Ardsley's always been a consistent team that has really, they've always had talent kind of funneled into the program, whether it was from guys coming up from the JV or just people in the building have arrived. And even if they lose a lot of guys, essentially they kind of just fill in those roles. Now, I think thank you. Now, the big thing is, I think that even though they have 0 guys returning on both the offense and defensive side, I think that Ardsley is going to surprise a lot of people. Now, granted, when you're looking at their rank, they're not necessarily saying like, oh, they're horrible on the bottom, but I think at the same time, a lot of people looking at Ardsley and thinking that, they lost everybody, right? And it's like, oh, well, you're not going to return to being a top level team. But I think Ardsley still has a lot of talent behind this roster, even if they are losing nearly every starter on both offensively and defense, because it's always hard to replace these guys. But I think Ardsley's going to have some skill powers that can give them a push, and I think it's going to really revolve around these young guys stepping up, right? I think Ardsley's going to surprise some teams out there, and I do think that they can bounce back, even if they're losing guys like Watson, who was a top level player in B, right? And I think he was a top level player in Section 1 last year, but I think Ardsley has the ability to make big plays because they throw basically a lot of different things at you. I think they have the really good ability to kind of mix and match the type of offense they're going to have based on the talent that they have currently with them. So Ardsley's going to surprise some teams for sure. I think that they are under, I guess you would say, under the radar because of the fact they lost a lot of kids. But we'll see what happens when the season starts.
Let's go to the next program. Byram Hills, coached by Coach Simon Burke. Last year, 5-4, they lost to Nanuet in the semifinals on a last-minute touchdown. They brought them down to the wire. And the last 5 years, 28-15, 65% win percentage. Offensively, Mars, they're bringing back 6 of 11 starters. They do have to replace their quarterback in Cohen. And on the offensive line, 2 out of 5 starters coming back. They also lost some guys, right? Cohen, I mentioned, who had a really strong year for them at the quarterback spot. Dralinger, Rocco, Secchiano. So this was the number 1 offense in B last year in points scored at 34.1. They had 4 40-plus point games, and they scored over 20-plus in each game in the regular season. But what hurt them last year, Mars, in big moments as well, too many turnovers. Too many turnovers kept other teams in the game and really hurt them in big moments. And defensively, also 6 of 11 starters coming back. This was the number 5 defense. This is the unit. Wasn't bad, right? But definitely improvement could be there. Last season, when I spoke to Coach about, things to improve on, last season the scheme was new. And we see this a lot too. When it's a new scheme and everyone trying to get used to it, there were just too many mistakes that led to big plays. And that's something that they want to correct this time around, having now another offseason in this scheme. And they want to rally to the ball better. The biggest question mark, obviously the quarterback spot is going to be big. They have to replace a very productive quarterback. And can the defense, how aggressive can this defense get, and how aggressive could this defense be? Because they are returning some guys, but they lost some important pieces as well. Coach also talked about leadership. Leadership is another thing he wants to see answered by the time the season starts. Now, goals, I love this line Coach used. B is a wildfire. And again, they made it to the semifinals last year, but There's a lot of new faces, and they have to improve each week. B really is kind of like a gauntlet, um, where really any team can come through in this division. But I like Byram Hills, makeup. I actually, and some of these players are the reason why. And I'm going to start with probably one of their best players, George Galage. And I probably butchered his name because I'm terrible with names, and I apologize. But he's a defensive end, defensive tackle, and offensive lineman, 6'5", 225 pounds, long, lean, and he has a good motor, man. I mean, he is a very disruptive football player. He does a good job using his hands, has solid athleticism for his size. He's a well-rounded defensive lineman, and he's going to have to anchor on both sides of the ball for this team to be successful. Another very productive player from last year, Gavin Jaworski, the running back and strong safety. This kid, 5'11", 185 pounds, well-built, Mars. He had over 1,200 yards of total offense and 18 touchdowns. This is a guy who can run the ball, especially hitting those C and D gaps, and also catch the ball out of the backfield. He's a very explosive player and a very important player. I would imagine I'm going to rely on him a lot. Another big body target, Sean Siegel, 6'3", 185 pounds. He's a wide receiver, outside linebacker, another tall, long football player. And some other guys to keep an eye on. A guy like Luke Weiler at the running back spot plays corner, but is also a very strong kicker and punter. There's a lot of raves about this young man. Could be a real weapon in special teams. He's a junior. Their linebacker, Rick Rosenthal, 5'9", 175 pounds, one of their returning leading tacklers coming back this season. Another guy to keep in mind, defensive back and wide receiver, Nathan Illini, and have to step in as a defensive back. But I'm looking at the quarterback spot, Mars, and Justin Barad, the senior, 5'10", 180 pounds. Interested to see how he kind of takes that mantle. Quarterback is a very important position, obviously, in any level of football. And how does he react, kind of taking this job and pushing forward is going to be very interesting, Mars. I think Byram Hills has some talent.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think Byram Hills is, last year was one of the youngest teams in B, right? And I mean, when you're looking at youngest teams, I think Pleasantville was the youngest last year, but then Byram Hills is right there. I mean, they had a lot of young guys that stepped up big time, and, you could see it. I mean, being the number one, offense based on points scored is impressive for a team with such a young roster. Now, obviously, losing your quarterback is going to be a big deal, but I think the fact that they have 6 returning guys on both offense and defensively is a good sign for them, and having O-line being 2 of the 5 is solid, but not the greatest. But at the end of the day, I think the key thing to think about here is that a lot of these dudes that had contributed to that success on the offensive side are going to be coming back, right? And I think it's going to be dependent on guys to make big plays, and also try to kind of step in some roles that were kind of left, right? And I think at the end of the day, the quarterback position is going to be one of the most important. And you just mentioned Justin Borad is going to be a guy that needs to step up big time. And I think it's going to be, up to him to kind of keep this machine going, right? It was a new system, but that new system essentially did, score a lot of points, right? And I think that is something that is definitely an eye opener, because usually when you hear of a new system, that means that there's a lot of mistakes, there's a lot of issues, but turnovers were a problem. But at the end of the day, they scored a lot, right? And I think that's something that Byram is going to have kind of now everyone on board. They know the system well, and now you're going to see kind of a new team emerge, I guess you would say. So Byram Hills is definitely an interesting team going into the season.
Let's go to the next group. Pearl River, coached by Mike Oliva. Last year, 4-5. They lost at Pleasantville in the quarterfinals. The last 5 years, they're 22-20 with 52 win percentage. Back-to-back losing seasons, though, for the first time since 2013, 2014. So they definitely want to try to back on track at Pearl River. Offensively, Marseille are returning 6 of their 11 starters. They do have to replace their quarterback, but on the offensive line, 3 of the 5 coming back, which is important. But I mentioned, you lose a guy like O'Neal, Responti, O'Connell, Carbone. Those are going to be some guys that they have to replace. In this offense, also faced some inconsistency. They were 6 out of 10 in points scored at 20.1. When I spoke to Coach, he said obviously quarterback is going to be the big question, but another big thing is limiting turnovers. They had way too many turnovers on offense last year, and that's something that is an emphasis this year. Defensively, 6 out of 11 starters coming back. This group also number 6 out of 10 in points allowed. Coach really is emphasizing to his kids the want to create more negative plays and turnovers. Give their offenses more opportunity, more chances. Um, this quarterback battle is going to be very interesting. And again, when me and you talk about this, Mars, we don't know the updates. We're not updated there every day at practice, so we're unsure of how the quarterback battle's gone through camp. But that is definitely the big question coming out of it for me. Looking at this group, and the goal for coach is, they just want more consistency this season. Get better each day. Focus in on the now, which is going to be important. Now, some players to keep in mind. I think the first one is DeGon McLaughlin, running back and defensive back. This kid, 5'11", 155 pounds, raw kid, but this is a kid who's pretty versatile. He can line up as a wide receiver, he can line up as a running back, kind of a wing back. He can run the ball on outside runs. He can run patterns for you and catch the ball. So this is an interesting player, and I do think he's going to have to be an important two-way player for this program. Excuse me. Another guy is linebacker and running back Timothy Gorham, the senior. Not the fastest guy, but boy, he has a nose for the football. And you know what? He attacks the line of scrimmage. He's not very hesitant. And I thought he was pretty solid, his tape. This is a guy who's going to have to be a big play for them on the defensive side of the ball, especially going against some heavy run teams. You need strong linebacker play. Another kid to keep in mind, offensive lineman and linebacker, Liam Morrissey. Coach liked the work that he's put in this offseason as well. This is a guy to keep an eye on. Thomas O'Mara, the offensive guard and defensive lineman. This guy, 5'10", 210 pounds. And again, you need guys who got to be able to move people and guys who got to be able to pull. And this is someone who could do that. And, coach liked the work that he's put in the offseason as well. Another guy, Alex Herrard, he's a running back and linebacker, the senior, 6'1", 190 pounds, had a shoulder injury last year. I'm excited to see him come back. He could be another important player on the offensive side of the ball. And one of the quarterbacks to keep in mind, again, mentioning the quarterback battle going on during the summer and in camp, Jack Whalen, he's a young guy, real young quarterback, and I think he has some raw potential to him. So I'm interested to see who comes out of this quarterback battle, the winner. But Mars, what are your thoughts on Pearl River?
Yeah, Pearl River is similar to when you look at Byram as being a younger team last year, right? And I think that was kind of the impressive thing about them was that they were tough. They played tough with a lot of teams, right? And they were relatively young compared to a lot of others. Like I said, you're comparing them. Pleasantville's probably the most young, but Byram and Pearl River were right there, right? And I think that it's important to kind of look at, usually a lot of times youth, it kind of leads to a lot of inconsistency and also a lot of turnovers that happen. So obviously, I think it's really important that they kind of limit those things. I do like the fact they have a lot of returning guys coming back. Around 6 on both sides of the ball, which is really good for them. And I think that the big question, you mentioned this already, was the quarterback battle. I mean, you want to see who will step in and kind of keep that machine going, because it's really difficult to have a replacement, and it could cause an issue when it comes to how efficient this offense can be, because like you said already, right, Pearl River's biggest goal was to be more efficient and limit the turnover. So having a young quarterback in there, they got to be able to learn the system and do it well enough so they don't have any turnovers that can now really hurt them in the long run. So it's going to be interesting what happens with Pearl River. I really I'm interested to see how this team kind of builds on the successes that they had from the previous year.
Yeah. Let's go to the next program, Bronxville, coached by Coach Manganelli. Last year they were 4-4. They lost to Ardsley in the quarterfinal. And again, this was a team that was in C. They moved back up to B last season. And I got to say, the last couple of years, Bronxville has really picked up. The last 3 years, Marks, they're 13-8. They've been 500 or better now for 3 straight years for the first time since 2013 to 2015. So you can see Bronxville kind of making that push on the upward trajectory. I didn't get to speak to coach, unfortunately. So I don't, again, have the exact number of offensive and defensive starters returning, but I do know that they have to replace their star-studded quarterback in Connor O'Neill, who was a do-it-all quarterback for them, a huge part of their offense. And they lost a couple other guys. They have to replace a couple linemen as well, and they lost guys like O'Neill, like I mentioned, Garofalo, who's a really strong running back for them, Mays, Kelty. There are some guys that were big contributors for them, and this was the offense last season in points scored at 30.7. 3 games, Mars, they had 48-plus points. But what killed Bronxville at times on the offense side of the ball fumbles. I mean, they had some brutal fumbles and a lot of them. I mean, there were games that they just coughed up the ball that cost them games, in my opinion. And I think turnovers is going to be a huge emphasis this year. Defensively, again, they lose a guy like McCormick. There are some guys that they have to replace defensively, but I do think they're bringing some people back. But I do think this unit is the most improvement. This was the number 9 out of 10 teams in points allowed, and I do think too many breakdowns, too many big chunk plays hurt this Bronxville team, and I do think that'll be an emphasis. For me, I'm looking at the biggest question mark. Defense, to me, is one of them, right? I mean, this was the number 9 defense out of 10 teams. I think they have the offense, and then they showed that they had that offense, and now it changes, obviously, losing their quarterback. We'll see how they adjust, but, their scheme can produce points. Question is, can they stop people enough? So that's a big question for me, and the quarterback spot. Obviously, you lose a stud quarterback like that. It's hard to replace that. So it's going to be probably more of a group effort offensively. Players to watch. One guy I really am excited to watch is their linebacker, Lou Fei Sung. 6 foot, 200-pound, multi-sport kid, downhill linebacker. And he's kind of a versatile linebacker. I think he can do multiple things for you. Good size to him. Diagnoses plays pretty well, and he takes pretty good angles to the football. So this is definitely a guy, I think he's one of the best linebackers in the class. Another guy, raw, talented football player, Alex Krostowski, the offensive tackle. He was a sophomore last year, junior this year, 6'5", 240 pounds. He has a great frame. I mean, you look at him and say, wow, like that's kind of how you want the lineman to be built. Probably could put on even more muscle, especially in his lower half. But he's very raw. And if he can work on some of his technique, he has that capability to be a dominant lineman. Another guy, Luke Stevens, wide receiver, Mars, another 6'5" kid. You're seeing these, big kids over at Bronxville. 6'5", 200 pounds, possession receiver, long frame, can make those contested catches for you. Could be a big target for this offense. A couple other guys, Chris Scotty, their center, long snapper, 6'4", 235. Another kid that, again, well built. You could see he's got some strength in his lower half and upper body. Again, another kid who has some raw technique he can work on. Jack Newton is a guy in the secondary at free safety and running back, 5'11", 170-pound kid. I saw him at the showcase. I thought he made some nice plays as well. Matthew McSherry, he was a young guy, going to be a sophomore, Morris, on the offensive line, defensive line. This kid's 6'1", 255 pounds. They really raved about this young man's potential. And, they're excited to see him on the varsity level as well. But again, I talked about one of the things that was a question mark, the quarterback, Mars. Pierce Patterson, quarterback, not a very tall guy at 5'8", but a scrappy kid. And the coaches have liked, talking to him about, back towards the showcase, they liked the progress that he had. And so I'm excited to see kind of how this offense shapes under him. And another guy, my player to watch, Gabe Messian, junior, running back and linebacker, well-built kid, 6'1", 200 pounds, thick kid. Definitely can work on some of his technique. He runs a little bit high, but a powerhouse. And if they're going to run some downhill runs, I think he could be a good player for them, and probably is going to have to be a two-way starter for them. Mars, what are your thoughts on Bronxville?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Bronxville, first I'm going to give a lot of kudos, a lot of credit to Coach Maganelli, because I think that when you look at them in the past 3 seasons, they have definitely made a turn, right? And I think that he does a great job with these kids. And I think the big thing to look at for Bronxville is, how do they replace some of those big time players? I mean, obviously Connor O'Neill being as just a crazy talent that he was, I think is the only best way to describe the guy is because he literally would cause havoc for teams. Like he was such a powerful runner, and he could just throw things like he's just like cannon for an arm. It's hard to replace that, right? But I think that when you look at this offense, they do have a lot of guys that, I mean, granted, only 4 of the 11 starters are returning, but they do have a lot of talent, a lot of depth that is going to contribute in a lot of different ways. The biggest question is definitely going to be the defense, and how can they limit the amount of points that other teams are going to be, because that was their biggest problem, is that they would score a good amount, but the problem is that similar to what we saw with other teams and was limit the amount of points, right? Because if you could score on will a lot of times, if you're giving up touchdowns easily, it's going to be a problem. So that's going to be the big question I have for Bronxville is how can they replace some of these key players like Con O'Neill, and how can they improve their defense enough so that they can really just stop I guess you would say, limit the amount of time that other teams get with the ball, right? And kind of give their offense, their high-powered offense, ability to get back on the field. So it's going to be interesting when that happens with Bronxville.
Yeah, and I do think offensively they could still be good. I don't think they'll be as explosive, which makes it even more important for the defense to improve in points allowed. Let's go to the next program, and the last one on our list is Briarcliff Hamilton football program, coached by Skip Stevens. Last year was their jump back into B, and they were 1-7. They lost at Nanuet in the quarterfinals. But there are some good news, and the numbers, when I talked to Coach, the numbers are up in the program. So they have 51 kids. They may finally have a JV this year, which is definitely a step in the right direction for this program. And, one other note I did want to make was this year, Mars, they are opening up their season at Alexander Hamilton's new field, which is going to be the first time that they've had a football game there since the 1980s. And they're going to be rocking some fresh new red unis, which I'm kind of excited to see. But that's a big moment for this program, and congratulations to that program. I think it's great. So that's something I did want to give a shout out to. But let's talk about the players returning. Offensively, Mars, 6 out of 11 starters are coming back. The quarterback is coming back, and they're returning 3 of their 5 offensive linemen. But they lose 2 star-studded players from their program, Savage and Rispoli, who were big-time players for them last year. This offense did have some struggles last year. They were number 8 out of 10 in points scored. And when I talked to Coach, the big focus is going to be on tempo and the execution of their plays. They like, again, to control the tempo of the game, and they're going to continue to do that, or that's what the goal is, what they want to do defensively. 5 or 6 of the 11 starters are returning. This is the number 7 unit out of 10 in points allowed. And Coach talked about, hey, they just got to do a better job of running to the ball and continuing to execute your job, which is, again, every person has a job in a certain scheme, and they need everybody to execute for it to work. That's an important message for pretty much any defensive coach. Obviously, everyone talks about flying to the ball, but executing your job is a big one. When I talked to Coach about the biggest question mark for his unit, he mentioned his strength. I thought this was an interesting thought, and it's because a lot of the kids in this program are multi-sport kids, so they jump from sport to sport. They don't get a full-fledged weight room experience similar to kind of some of the other programs do, but can they match up against some of the bigger, stronger teams is kind of the biggest question mark for them. And the goal is just to be better than last year, and I do think they have some talent that they could possibly do that. Now, problem is there's no easy game in B. You're just facing the gauntlet every week, so it's hard to determine that, but that's the goal. And a couple players to keep an eye on, Mars. One player I really like, the player to watch for this unit, wide receiver and quarterback Adam Harris. I think he's one of the best wide receivers in this class coming back, 6'1", 185 pounds. Solid route runner, but he's strong at the point of attack. He can make some strong hands. He also shows some speed that he can hurt teams on deep route concepts. And I do think he is I think he's scheduled. He can have a big year. Another guy, running back and linebacker, Desmond Saw. I really like this young man at linebacker. This is a downhill guy. He'll really hit you. He's not afraid, but they're also raving about his ability to run the ball as a downhill runner as well. And he's going to be important. Their quarterback, who is returning, Ben Raphael. Coaches have talked about his improvement this summer and his technique. His arm, has gotten stronger. So they're excited for this young man. Chris Harper, another guy, a wide receiver and cornerback. Defensive end, Luca Mayola. He's a lax player, but someone who can try to help on the defensive front. And some other guys, Henry Kavanaugh, offensive center and defensive tackle, 5'11", 225 pounds. AJ Milano on the offensive line and defensive line. And how about his special teamers, Mars? Daniel Citron. I actually think he could be one of the better kickers in this class that probably not a lot of people talk about. He's a senior as well, Mars. What are your thoughts on Briarcliff?
I mean, first off, you got to give them a lot of credit. The fact that their program is continuing to grow, and the fact that they're going to be playing at Alexander Hamilton since the last time, what was it, the 1980s? It was like, that's such a big deal for that program, right? Being able to go do that. So I think that is, and obviously, rocking these new red unis is going to be really cool to see. Now, I think that the biggest thing when I'm looking at Briarcliff Hamilton was that they do have a lot of guys returning. I mean, you have a 6 on the offensive side, around 5 or 6 on the defensive side. So you're gonna get some cohesion. You're gonna get some guys who know the system and that are returning, which will give a benefit to the team. But I do agree with you. The biggest concern is going to be strength. Can they match the size that you're going to see in a lot of these other B teams, right? I think you said it best. B's a gauntlet. There's going to be a battle between all these teams. They're not far apart, right? A lot of people always look at, A being one of the toughest divisions, classes to win in, and double A as well. B is tough classes too, because everyone is not that far away from each other, and you don't know who's going to walk away as the winner, right? I think that's kind of the key thing that people forget about, right?
Yeah, there's larger gaps in A and double A from teams in the top versus the bottom that I don't see in B.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that Briarcliff Hamilton, the biggest thing is, obviously utilizing the athleticism, because like you said, they have multi-sport athletes that come out to play. So they do have athleticism on this squad. It's about utilizing that the best way possible. I think multiple types of, formations that can be thrown at people would be a great asset for them to use, because they have the talent. They have people that can, do well in a lot of different sports. By utilizing that talent and just capitalizing. And I think just limiting turnovers and I think giving your offense more capabilities to get back on the field and get some points.
Yeah. Well, that was our preview for all the teams in Section 1B, Morris. Now the final part before we close the show. I like to every year, and I've done this now the past 2 years. I like to give some bold predictions. And, I've looked into my crystal ball, and I kind of wish I had a crystal ball here. But I saw some visions into the future of what's going to happen in 1B. And I'm going to give Mars the opportunity to buy or sell my visions, my bets for this season. And so Mars can buy or sell them. And then at the end of the year, we'll see how foolish Mars is for not buying all of my predictions. But let's dive into them, Mars. And my first prediction, Byram Hills and Pleasantville were both number one. Byram Hills was number one on offense. Pleasantville was number one on defense in points allowed and points scored in the regular season. My prediction, Mars, is they will repeat that this season. Byram Hills will be number one again in points scored in the regular season, and Pleasantville will be number one in defense and points allowed in the regular season. Mars, do you buy or sell my prediction? Back-to-back years.
I'm going to buy that. I think that Byram Hills had a young squad, and they were still number one, right? They were still number one in points scored, and I think that they're going to have a lot of returning guys, and I think this is going to give them an advantage when it comes to scoring points. In Pleasantville, same thing, just the other side of the ball. They were a young team, and they were number one in defense and points allowed, so I think that they can definitely repeat it, so I'm going to buy here.
All right, and here's my next vision and bet. The Final Four last season, Mars, was Pleasantville, Nanuet, Byram Hills, and Ardsley. My prediction and what I've seen in the crystal ball is 3 out of the 4 of those teams will return to the semifinals this season. 3 out of the 4. So not all 4, 3 out of the 4. Do you buy or sell my prediction?
I'm going to sell. I'm going to sell on this one. I'm not going to say who I think will be in the Final Four, but I do think there will be, it won't be exactly with 3 of these teams. I think that you might be close, but I'm not going to say exactly teams. I just think I'm going to sell on this one.
Interesting. Here's a bold one. Bronxville will end the regular season in the top 4 of the league standings. Mars, do you buy or sell my prediction?
I'm going to sell that one. I think I'm going to sell that one. I think what I'm looking, it's going to be tough. I just think I'm going to sell here. I think B is a really tough class to play in. It's like you really think about it. There could be a lot of teams that show up and surprise people. So I'm going to sell for this one.
Final one, Mars. Pleasantville played Nanuet in the section title game last season. This year, Pleasantville will make its return, but they will be playing Byram Hills in the section title game. Do you buy or sell?
I'm gonna buy. I'll buy that. I think that these two teams have the youngest squads that are entering into this season, and they have the biggest, most returning kids in the same way, right? So I think that they were really young last year, showed a lot of promise, and now number one offense and number one defense. Now they're having a lot of kids return. It almost seems like they could repeat in a lot of those ways, that those categories, and the same way in successes. So I'm sure I'm putting a lot of targets on both Pleasantville and Byram Hills' back with that buy, and the same thing for you. But the question is going to be, people are going to look at you and say, hey, you guys are the top dogs. My perspective would be prove it, right? So that's how I would look at it. For both these squads, prove that you are considered the top dog. If Frank here is saying this is his bold prediction, that means he must have a lot of faith in both these squads to get there. So,
hey, man, this is what I seen in my crystal ball, and maybe it's lying to me, but that is my bold predictions for this season, and we're just having a lot of fun with it too, guys. But let us know if you buy or sell, and I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of hate for it, buy or sell in the comments from the other schools. But let me know which ones you agree with, which ones you disagree with. But that will be our show. I want to thank everybody again for tuning in. We really do appreciate you guys. Make sure you guys give a thumbs up and subscribe if you like for future content. We hope you have a great start to the football season. We will be doing a prediction show for week 1, not week 0, but for week 1. And we'll see you all very soon. Have a good night.